There is a notebook in the Sabarmati Ashram archive in Ahmedabad, India. The cover is brown cloth, faded at the corners. The handwriting on the first page belongs to a young woman named Manu Gandhi. The date at the top of the page is December 1946. She was 19 years old. She was the grandniece of Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi, the man the world calls the Mahatma, the man the world calls the saint of nonviolence, the man whose face is on the currency of India and on the walls of dormitories and law offices on every continent. The notebook is not a forgery. The notebook is not a rumor. The notebook was kept by Manu herself on the explicit instruction of the man she called Bapu, the man she called grandfather. He told her to write down everything. He told her this would be her contribution to truth. He used the word satya, truth. I am Blackwell. I am not here to tear down a statue. I am here to read the page Manu wrote. What is on the page is this. In the cold winter of 1946 and into 1947, while the subcontinent burned with the violence of partition, Mohandas Gandhi conducted what he called brahmacharya experiments. He slept naked beside his grandniece. He instructed her to sleep naked beside him. He explained, in writing, in conversation, in front of his closest associates, that this was a test of his vow of celibacy. He believed that if his mind did not stir, if his body did not respond, then he had achieved a level of spiritual purity that would allow him, by some occult logic of the soul, to calm the killings between Hindus and Muslims hundreds of miles away. I am holding that paragraph in my mind as I begin this episode. 6 names, 6 halos, 6 archives that no one wanted opened. Blackwell opened them, not to destroy the names, to return the men and women inside the names to the human size they actually were. Manu Gandhi was born in 1927. By the time she came to live with her granduncle, she was a teenager who had already lost her mother. Gandhi took her in. He treated her with affection. He also, in the historical record, in her own diary, in the testimony of the men around him, used her body in a spiritual experiment that he believed had cosmic stakes. Her own writings show her devotion to him. Her writings also show confusion. They show a girl trying to please a man who was, for her, both family and God. The words she wrote were not the words of a free adult. They were the words of a young person inside a closed religious system, trying to articulate what it meant when the saint asked her into his bed. His own associates noticed. The most famous of them was Nirmal Kumar Bose. Bose was an anthropologist. He was educated. He was devoted to Gandhi. He had spent years walking with him through the violence-torn villages of Noakhali in Bengal. Bose was the man who wrote down many of Gandhi's conversations. Bose was the man who heard Gandhi explain the experiments in his own voice. And in early 1947, Bose resigned. He resigned because he could not stand it. He wrote letters describing what he had seen. He wrote that he believed the experiments were causing harm to the young women involved. He wrote that he believed Gandhi was deceiving himself about the nature of what he was doing. The resignation is in the archive. The letters are in the archive. They are not whispers, they are documents. Bose was not the only one. Other longtime allies broke with Gandhi during this period. Some left the ashram. Some wrote private letters to him begging him to stop. He did not stop. He believed, with the absolute conviction that only a man who has been right about a great many things can have, that he was right about this also. Joseph Lelyveld, the former editor of the New York Times, published a biography in 2011 called Great Soul. The book was banned in the state of Gujarat the moment it was released. The book was banned not because it was a lie. The book was banned because it told the truth about the experiments and about Gandhi's intense, complex, intellectually intimate relationship with a German Jewish architect named Hermann Kallenbach. India did not want the book. India wanted the statue. Blackwell read the book. Blackwell also read the primary sources Lelyveld used, the Manu diary, the Bose papers, the collected works of Mahatma Gandhi, 98 volumes, published by the government of India itself. In those volumes, Gandhi himself describes the experiments. He does not deny them. He defends them. He writes about them with a strange mixture of guilt and pride. He writes letters to women he had known years earlier, asking forgiveness for thoughts he had had about them. He writes to his secretaries about whether his nighttime erections proved he had failed his vow. This is the paradox at the center of Mohandas Gandhi. He was, without question, one of the most important political figures of the 20th century. The Salt March of 1930 changed the moral architecture of resistance to empire. The hunger strikes were real. The personal poverty was real. The walking through villages full of corpses during the partition killings, calming Hindus and Muslims with his own body as the only shield, was real. He died for it. On January 30th, 1948, a Hindu nationalist named Nathuram Godse shot him 3 times in the chest at point-blank range in the garden of Birla House in Delhi. Godse hated Gandhi for being too kind to Muslims. The killing made the saint into a martyr. The martyrdom made the saint into a god. But the saint was a man. The man slept beside his grandniece. The man defended it in writing. The man lost friends over it. The man kept doing it anyway. The man was 67 years old. She was 19. She called him grandfather. He called the experiments a test of his soul. Blackwell sat in the Sabarmati archive. The page was the December 1946 entry. He closed the notebook after 1 paragraph. Not because he could not handle it, because the paragraph was enough, because the paragraph said everything. The lesson is not that Gandhi was a hypocrite. The lesson is harder than that. The lesson is that the human beings we elevate into icons remain human beings. They carry contradictions inside them that no biography written for the airport bookstore will ever capture. The Salt March and the Brahmacharya experiments lived inside the same skull. The man who walked unarmed into riot zones and the man who asked a teenage girl to undress beside him were the same man. The lesson of history is not to choose one side and erase the other. The lesson is to hold both. The Indian state has not chosen to hold both. The state prefers the statue. The state prefers the currency note. The state prefers the documentary that ends with the funeral pyre and the music swelling. Blackwell does not blame the state. The state has a country to run. A country needs simple stories. But you, the person watching this video, you are not a country. You are a human being. And human beings are allowed to look at the whole archive. The whole archive is what we are doing tonight. The second name is Mother Teresa. The second halo is the Nobel Peace Prize of 1979. The second archive is $50 million American dollars from a man who went to federal prison for one of the largest financial frauds in American history. Agnes Gonja Bojaxa. Agnes Gonja Bojaxiu was born in 1910 in Skopje, in what was then the Ottoman Empire and is now North Macedonia. She was Albanian. She was Catholic. Her family was middle class, devout, intact, until her father died suddenly when she was 8 years old, possibly poisoned for his political activities. The family fell into poverty. The girl turned toward the church. By the age of 18, she had taken the name Teresa after the French saint Thérèse of Lisieux and had boarded a ship for Ireland to join the Sisters of Loreto. From Ireland, she went to India. From India, she never came back. In 1948, she walked out of the Loreto convent in Calcutta with 5 rupees in her pocket and the conviction, she said, that Jesus Christ had spoken directly to her on a train and instructed her to serve the poorest of the poor. 2 years later, in 1950, the Vatican approved her new order. She called it the Missionaries of Charity. The blue-bordered white sari became one of the most recognized garments on earth. By 1979, she had a Nobel Peace Prize. By 2003, she was beatified. By 2016, she was a saint of the Roman Catholic Church. This is the version on the Holy Card. This is the version in the school textbook. This is the version your grandmother believed without question, and was right to believe, because it is part of the truth. Now Blackwell opens the second drawer. In 1981, in the United States, a man named Charles Keating took control of Lincoln Savings and Loan in California. Over the next 8 years, he ran one of the largest financial frauds in American history. He used depositors' money for personal luxuries, political bribes, and reckless speculation. When the bank collapsed in 1989, it cost American taxpayers more than $3 billion. 23,000 investors, many of them elderly, lost their retirement savings. Keating was convicted of fraud and racketeering. He went to federal prison. During his rise, before the collapse, Charles Keating gave Mother Teresa $1.25 million in cash. Some sources, including the prosecuting attorney's later open letter, placed the total contribution at over $1 million in direct gifts, plus the use of a private jet. Mother Teresa, in return, wrote a public letter of support for Keating during his criminal trial. She praised his charity. She asked the judge for leniency. The letter is in the court record. You can read it. After Keating's conviction, the Deputy District Attorney of Los Angeles County, a man named Paul Turley, wrote Mother Teresa an open letter. He explained, in plain language, that the money she had received was not Charles Keating's money. It was stolen. It belonged to thousands of ordinary people who had lost their savings. He asked her, simply and respectfully, to return the funds so they could be returned to the victims. She did not reply. The money was not returned. It is, by the most generous reading, still in the accounts of the order she founded. This is documented. This is in the Los Angeles Times. This is in the federal court archive. This is not a Blackwell theory. This is a paper trail. Now, the harder file, the medical file. In 1994, the British medical journal, The Lancet, published an article by Dr. Robin Fox, the journal's editor, who had personally visited the missionaries of charity homes in Calcutta. What he described was not a medical facility. The volunteers had no training. Needles were rinsed in cold water and reused on multiple patients. Painkillers, even basic ones like aspirin, were withheld from patients in advanced stages of cancer and other terminal conditions. Tuberculosis patients were not separated from those with other illnesses. Diagnoses were not made. Patients who could have been saved by transfer to a real hospital were not transferred. The reason for this, according to Mother Teresa's own words, was theological. She believed suffering brought the poor closer to Christ. She said it directly, to journalists, to documentary cameras, to the volunteers who arrived expecting a hospital and found a hospice without medicine. She said in one widely quoted statement that there was something beautiful in the poor accepting their lot, something Christ-like. She said the world gained much from their suffering. Meanwhile, when Mother Teresa herself developed heart problems in the 1990s, she was treated at the Scripps Clinic in California and at a private hospital in Rome. She received the best cardiac care available on Earth. Modern equipment, trained specialists, full anesthesia, full pain management. The poor she served got reused needles and a crucifix on the wall. This is the contradiction. This is the file. This is what Christopher Hitchens, the British journalist, documented in his 1995 book and in his Channel 4 documentary the year before. Hitchens was not gentle. Hitchens was a polemicist, but his sources were primary sources. The volunteers who left the order and spoke on camera, the medical professionals who toured the homes, the court records of the Keating donation, the letter from Paul Turley. The Vatican itself, when it began the canonization process, was forced to confront another archive. Mother Teresa's private letters to her confessors. They were collected after her death and published in 2007 in a book called Come Be My Light. The letters are devastating. They are not the letters of a woman in the constant joy of God. They are the letters of a woman who, for nearly 50 years, felt that God had abandoned her. She wrote of darkness. She wrote of emptiness. She wrote that when she smiled in public, the smile was a mask. She wrote to one priest that the work she was doing brought her no joy, no comfort, no presence of the divine, only the grinding obligation of a vow. The Church framed this as the dark night of the soul, a known phase in Catholic mysticism. Perhaps that is true, but it raises a harder question. If the woman who told the dying poor to embrace their suffering as a path to God privately doubted, for 50 years, that God was even there, what exactly was the suffering for? Mother Teresa died on September 5, 1997, in Calcutta, age 87, of heart failure. She received a state funeral from the government of India. The body was carried on the same gun carriage that had carried Mahatma Gandhi 49 years earlier. The Pope canonized her 19 years after her death. Blackwell is not telling you to throw away the rosary. Blackwell is telling you to read the Lancet article. Read the open letter from the Los Angeles Deputy District Attorney. Read her own letters to her confessors. The order she founded does extraordinary work in places no one else will go. Volunteers who serve there speak of real love and real sacrifice. The picture is not black. The picture is not white. The picture is a woman who built something enormous, who took money from a thief and would not return it, who told the dying that their pain was beautiful while she flew to California for the best medicine on the planet, and who believed, in private, for half a century, that the God she served had vanished. Saints are not made of glass. Saints are made of flesh. Flesh has temperature and pulse and contradiction. To pretend otherwise is to insult the actual life she actually lived. The third name, the third halo, the third archive. Winston Leonard Spencer Churchill was born November 30th, 1874, at Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire, England, the family seat of the Dukes of Marlborough. His father was a senior conservative politician. His mother was an American heiress. He was educated at Harrow and at Sandhurst, the British Military Academy. He served as a cavalry officer in India and the Sudan. He was captured by the Boers in South Africa and escaped, an episode that made him a national celebrity at age 25. He entered Parliament. He became First Lord of the Admiralty. He fell. He spent the 1930s in what he called his wilderness years, warning, correctly, that Adolf Hitler was preparing to destroy Europe. In May 1940, when the warnings came true and the previous government collapsed, Winston Churchill became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. What he did between 1940 and 1945 is genuinely heroic. The speeches were not propaganda invented later. The speeches were delivered on the radio while German bombs fell on London. Britain stood alone for a year. Churchill held it together with cigars, brandy, willpower, and language. The free world, what remained of it, owed him a debt that no honest accounting can ever erase. Now Blackwell opens the cabinet papers. In 1943, in the Indian province of Bengal, 3 million people died. They did not die in combat. They died of starvation. They died with empty stomachs in the streets of Calcutta and in the rice paddies of the Eastern Delta. Mothers carried dead children to relief camps that had no food. Bodies were collected by the cart. The British government, the colonial power, had complete administrative control over the region. The British government had grain. The British government had ships. The British government, under the direct authority of the War Cabinet chaired by Winston Churchill, made specific decisions during 1943. Wheat shipments from Australia, intended for India, were redirected to Mediterranean stockpiles for the eventual liberation of Europe. Rice exports from Bengal to other parts of the empire continued. Boats along the Bengal coast were seized and destroyed under a denial of resources policy in case the Japanese invaded. The boats were the boats fishermen used to feed their families. The Japanese never invaded. Madhushri Mukherjee, a physicist and journalist, gained access to the relevant War Cabinet papers when they were declassified by the British National Archives in 2010. She published her findings in a book called Churchill's Secret War. The papers are not ambiguous. Churchill personally rejected multiple requests from the Viceroy of India and from Leopold Amory, his own Secretary of State for India, to release grain from imperial stockpiles to feed Bengal. He cited shipping shortages. The shipping records show the shortages were not absolute. He cited the war effort. The war in Europe was already turning. He cited, in private comments recorded by Amory in his diary, his personal contempt for Indians. The Amory diary entry on a meeting in September 1942 records Churchill saying that he hated Indians, that they were a beastly people with a beastly religion, and that the famine, when it came, was their own fault for breeding like rabbits. Amory, a fellow conservative, a man who had served Churchill for years, wrote that he was so disturbed by the conversation that he wondered, in his own words, whether the Prime Minister was sane on the subject of India. The diary is in the Bodleian Library at Oxford. It has been there for decades. Historians have read it, the British public in general has not. 3 million dead. The official figure used by the Indian government and by Amartya Sen, the Nobel-winning economist who studied the famine, is between 2.1 and 3 million. Mukherjee's analysis, using updated demographic methods, places it at the higher end. To put that in perspective, the population of London during the Blitz was around 8 million. The famine in Bengal killed the equivalent of 1/3 of London. It happened in 8 months. It happened while a man in Whitehall was inhaling cigar smoke and refusing to send the wheat. Churchill's 6-volume memoir of the Second World War, published between 1948 and 1953, won him the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1953. The Bengal famine is not in the index. The Bengal famine is not described. The Bengal famine, in the official Churchill account of the war he won, did not happen. He died on January 24, 1965, age 90. The funeral was a state funeral, the first for a non-royal in 56 years. The coffin traveled by Thames barge, while cranes along the docks dipped in salute. 5,000 soldiers lined the route. The Queen attended. Heads of state from 112 nations attended. In Bengal, no monument was built. In Bengal, 3 million graves had no marker. Blackwell is not arguing that Churchill should be deleted. Without Churchill, the Nazi regime might have negotiated with a defeated Britain, and the war ends differently, and the Holocaust ends differently, and the world we live in is unrecognizable. The man saved a continent. The man also presided over the deaths of 3 million people in another continent and erased them from his memoirs. Both are in the archive. Both are part of the man. You can love your country and read the file. You can admire the speeches and weep for the rice farmers. The grown-up position, the only honest position, is to hold the contradiction without flinching. The fourth name. John Fitzgerald Kennedy was born May 29, 1917, in Brookline, Massachusetts. He was the second son of Joseph P. Kennedy, the bootlegging Irish-American financier who became United States ambassador to the United Kingdom on the eve of the Second World War. He was educated at Choate and at Harvard. He served as a naval officer in the Pacific. His patrol torpedo boat, PT-109, was rammed by a Japanese destroyer in 1943. He swam his crew to safety, towing a wounded sailor by a strap held in his teeth. The story made him famous. The story was true. He entered the House of Representatives in 1946. He entered the Senate in 1952. He won the presidency on November 8, 1960, by a margin so narrow that the result is still disputed in some Illinois precincts to this day. He was 43 years old, the youngest man ever elected president of the United States. He was Catholic, the first. He was handsome, the first who used television as an instrument of personal magnetism. He had a beautiful wife. He had 2 small children. He stood on the steps of the Capitol on January 20th, 1961, and said, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." Camelot. Now Blackwell opens the medical file. The file was sealed for 40 years. In 2002, the John F. Kennedy Library released it to the historian Robert Dallek. Dallek published his findings in a biography called An Unfinished Life. The release was approved by the Kennedy family, which deserves, on this point, real credit. They could have kept it sealed. They did not. The file shows that John Kennedy was, throughout his adult life, a profoundly sick man. He suffered from Addison's disease, a failure of the adrenal glands, which during his lifetime was often fatal. He had osteoporosis of the lumbar spine so severe that he could not put on his own socks without assistance. He had chronic colitis. He had chronic prostatitis. He was in pain, constant pain, every day of his presidency. To manage the pain, he was prescribed an extraordinary quantity of medications: cortisone for the Addisons, procaine injections directly into his back, antispasmodics for the colon, antibiotics for chronic infections, sleeping pills at night, stimulants in the morning, testosterone, codeine, methadone on occasion. The records show, on certain days, 8 to 12 different drugs in his system simultaneously. And then there was Dr. Max Jacobson. Max Jacobson was a German-born physician who practiced in New York City. His patients included artists, musicians, politicians, celebrities. He was known, in their private circles, by a nickname, Dr. Feelgood. His specialty was injections, custom blends of vitamins, hormones, animal placenta, painkillers, and a generous quantity of pure methamphetamine. He gave these injections, by his own later admission, on demand, often without medical justification, sometimes daily. President Kennedy began seeing Dr. Jacobson in 1960, before the election. He continued through the presidency. Jacobson traveled with the president. He was at the Vienna summit with Khrushchev in June 1961, where Kennedy, by his own account afterwards, was shaken and outmatched. Jacobson administered injections in the White House residence. He administered injections in Air Force One. The Secret Service, in declassified interviews, confirmed the visits. The visitor logs, partially preserved, confirmed them. Now place this fact next to a date. October 16th to October 28th, 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. 13 days during which the United States and the Soviet Union came closer to nuclear war than at any other moment in human history. The man making the decisions, the man weighing the photographs from U-2 reconnaissance flights, the man choosing between a naval blockade and an airstrike on Cuba, the man whose finger was on the button, was a man whose body was being held together by a daily cocktail of cortisone, procaine, methadone, and methamphetamine. We do not know, and will probably never know, exactly which substances were active in his bloodstream during which conversations. The records are incomplete. The medications were given in private. The doctor most responsible for the riskiest injections lost his medical license in 1975 after years of investigation. He died in 1979. What we do know is this: the President of the United States, during the closest brush with nuclear annihilation in recorded history, was on amphetamines. The world held its breath while a chemically altered man made the decision not to bomb Cuba. He made the right decision. He chose the blockade. He communicated through back channels with Khrushchev. The crisis ended. 600 million people did not die. But it was, in some real sense, a coin toss made by a man who could not feel his own legs without a needle. The American public knew none of this. The American public was shown a tanned, smiling, vigorous young president playing touch football on the Hyannisport lawn. The press knew. The press did not report. The standards of journalism in 1962 considered presidential health a private matter. The standards changed only after the man was gone. He was assassinated in Dallas on November 22, 1963, age 46. Lee Harvey Oswald shot him from the Texas School Book Depository. The investigation into Oswald and into the larger circumstances continues to generate books and theories 60 years later. The medical file, in some ways, is more disturbing than any of the conspiracy theories. The man we elected, the icon of American optimism, was already dying. He was held together by chemistry and by the discipline of a Catholic upbringing that taught him not to complain. He governed in pain. He decided in fog. He won the most dangerous standoff of the Cold War, while his own physician was injecting him with substances no responsible doctor would administer to a healthy adult. Blackwell does not say this to demolish him. Blackwell says this because the truth is more interesting than the myth. The myth says a golden young god ruled briefly and was struck down. The truth says a profoundly ill man, in genuine physical agony, made decisions of cosmic consequence while the cameras showed him smiling. Which version teaches you more about leadership? Which version teaches you more about what it costs to hold a hard job with a broken body? The myth is for tourists. The truth is for adults. The fifth name. Albert Einstein was born March 14, 1879, in Ulm, in the Kingdom of Württemberg, in what was then the recently unified German Empire. His family was Jewish, secular, middle class, in the textile and electrical trades. He was a mediocre student in some subjects, brilliant in mathematics and physics. He failed his first entrance examination to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic. He passed on the second try. He met, in his physics class at the Polytechnic, a Serbian woman named Mileva Maric. Mileva was, by every account, formidable. She was one of the only women admitted to the physics program at the Polytechnic. She was older than him by nearly 4 years. She was intellectually his equal in mathematics, possibly his superior in some areas. They fell in love. They had a daughter, Liesel, in 1902, before they were married. Liesel disappears from the historical record in 1903, possibly given up for adoption, possibly dead in infancy. Her fate is one of the great unresolved questions of Einstein scholarship. They married in 1903. They had 2 sons, Hans Albert and Edward. In 1905, Albert Einstein, working as a patent clerk in Bern, published 4 papers that changed physics forever: the photoelectric effect, Brownian motion, special relativity, mass energy equivalence, the equation E equals mc squared. He was 26 years old. The year is called the Miracle Year. It is, without exaggeration, one of the most productive intellectual periods in the history of any human being. In 1915, in Berlin, he completed general relativity. In 1919, the British astronomer Arthur Eddington photographed a solar eclipse and confirmed that starlight bent around the sun by exactly the amount Einstein's equations predicted. The world changed overnight. Einstein became, almost instantly, the most famous scientist alive, a status he never lost. In 1921, he won the Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect work, not for relativity, for technical reasons of the prize committee. In 1933, when Hitler came to power, Einstein, then traveling in the United States, did not return to Germany. He took a position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. He stayed there for the rest of his life. He wrote the famous letter to President Roosevelt in 1939, warning that the Germans might develop an atomic bomb. He later regretted that letter. He died on April 18, 1955, in Princeton, age 76, of an aortic aneurysm he had refused to have surgically repaired. He said, when his time came, he wanted to go. This is the icon. The wild hair, the kind eyes, the tongue stuck out at the photographer. The man who told schoolchildren that imagination was more important than knowledge. The face on every dorm room poster of every science student who ever lived. Now Blackwell opens the letters. In 1987, Princeton University Press began publishing the collected papers of Albert Einstein. The first volume contained letters from his student years and his first marriage. Among them was a document written in his own hand that he sent to his wife Mileva sometime in 1914, the year before he completed general relativity, the year their marriage was disintegrating. The document is a list. He titles it Conditions. He proposes that Mileva accept these conditions if she wishes to remain his wife. Condition 1. She will see to it that his clothes and laundry are kept in good order. Condition 2. She will see that he receives his 3 meals regularly in his room. Condition 3. She will keep his bedroom and study clean, and in particular, his desk shall be at his disposal alone. Condition 4. She will renounce all personal relations with him insofar as they are not absolutely required for social reasons. Specifically, she will forego sitting with him at home, going out with him, traveling with him, Condition 5. She will not expect any affection from him and will not reproach him. She will cease talking to him if he so requests. She will leave his bedroom or study without protest if he so requests. The document is signed Albert Einstein. The original is held in the Einstein archives at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem and reproduced in the Princeton edition. Mileva, briefly, accepted the conditions. The marriage did not survive. They separated. They divorced in 1919. Einstein had been, throughout the marriage, in a relationship with his cousin Elsa Lowenthal, whom he married the same year the divorce was finalized. The relationship with his sons deteriorated. Hans Albert, the elder, became an engineer in the United States and maintained a strained but functional relationship with his father into adulthood. Edward, the younger, developed schizophrenia in his late teens. He was institutionalized in Switzerland. The Nobel Prize money, when it was awarded in 1922, was sent in its entirety to Mileva in Zurich as part of the divorce settlement. This is sometimes cited as evidence of his honor. The settlement document shows it was a contractual obligation. He had agreed, in writing, that any future Nobel Prize would go to her. He paid what he owed. He did not visit. Roger Highfield and Paul Carter, in their 1993 book, The Private Lives of Albert Einstein, traced the correspondence in detail. Walter Isaacson, in his 2007 biography, treated the same material with more sympathy, but did not dispute the facts. The letters to other women during and after the marriage to Elsa show a pattern. Einstein had affairs. He documented them. He wrote about them, sometimes coldly, in letters to friends. He treated the women in his life as concentric circles around the central object, which was the work, which was the physics, which was the only thing that mattered. The wives were instruments, the children were administrative responsibilities, the cousins were comfort, the work was the marriage. He said it himself in a letter to a friend in 1924. He wrote that he had twice married badly. He wrote that he was, by nature, unfit for ordinary human attachment. He wrote that the only true partner of his life was the equation. There is a long debate in the history of physics about whether Mileva marriage contributed substantively to the 1905 papers. Some scholars argue she did. Others, looking at the same evidence, argue the contribution was emotional and logistical rather than mathematical. The honest answer is that we will never know exactly. What we do know is that on the joint correspondence between them in the years before 1905, Albert refers to the work in the first person plural. Our work, our paper, our theory. After 1905, after the publications appeared under his name alone, the plural disappears. After the divorce, the plural never returns. Mileva died in 1948 in Zurich, in poverty, having spent most of her later years caring for the institutionalized Edward. She was buried in an unmarked grave. The grave was identified and marked by a private foundation only in 2004. Albert Einstein, when he died in 1955, requested that his ashes be scattered in an undisclosed location and that no monument be built. He wanted no statue. He wanted no shrine. The world built statues anyway. Blackwell holds this contradiction the way you hold a stone you found in a riverbed. The man rewrote the universe. The man also handed his wife a typed list of conditions and told her not to speak unless spoken to. Both are in the archive. Both are part of what it costs, sometimes, to live inside a brain that bends space-time. The cost is paid by the people in the next room. The next room is in the file. And now, the sixth name, the hardest name, the most dangerous name to handle honestly, because the modern world has decided that this man is beyond examination. And the modern world is, on this question, wrong. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela was born July 18, 1918, in the village of Mvezo in the Eastern Cape of South Africa. His father was a counselor to the Thembu royal family. His name, Rolihlahla, means, in Xhosa, troublemaker. The English name Nelson was given to him by a teacher on his first day of school. He attended the University College of Fort Hare. He studied law in Johannesburg. In 1944, he co-founded the African National Congress Youth League. In 1948, the National Party of South Africa came to power and began the formal legal architecture of apartheid. For 13 years, from 1948 to 1961, Nelson Mandela led nonviolent resistance. He organized boycotts. He organized strikes. He defended Black South Africans in court when no one else would. He was arrested. He was charged with treason in 1956 and acquitted in 1961 after a 5-year trial. He believed in those years in the methods of Gandhi. In 1960, on March 21st, in the township of Sharpeville, South African police opened fire on a crowd of unarmed protesters. 69 people were killed. Most were shot in the back as they fled. Hundreds were wounded. The government declared a state of emergency. The ANC was banned. Peaceful protest under the new laws became impossible. Every nonviolent avenue closed. In 1961, Nelson Mandela co-founded an armed wing of the African National Congress. The COSA name was Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation. He was its first commander. He was, in the formal language of the organization, the head of military operations. The decision was deliberate. He wrote about it later in his autobiography. He explained that nonviolence requires a state willing to be shamed. He explained that apartheid South Africa had no shame to be punctured. He explained that when peaceful methods are met with bullets in the back, the calculus changes. Between 1961 and 1990, Umkhonto we Sizwe carried out, by the count of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of South Africa, published in 1998, more than 190 bombings and armed actions inside South Africa. The targets included infrastructure. They also included civilian targets. The Church Street bombing in Pretoria in May 1983 killed 19 people and wounded over 200. The Magoo's Bar bombing in Durban in June 1986 killed 3 civilians and wounded 69. There were others. The TRC documented them. The ANC, under Mandela's later leadership, formally acknowledged them and apologized for the civilian casualties. This is the part of the story that the international hagiography quietly removed. For most of his imprisonment, from his 1962 arrest until 1985, Amnesty International refused to designate Nelson Mandela a prisoner of conscience. The reason was specific and procedural. Amnesty's mandate, then as now, applied to prisoners who had not advocated or used violence. Mandela, at his Rivonia trial in 1964, did not dispute the charge that he had founded the armed wing. He confirmed it. He defended it as morally necessary. Amnesty, applying its rules, declined to call him a prisoner of conscience. He remained a political prisoner, a target of international solidarity, a name on banners around the world. But the specific amnesty designation was withheld. The organization lifted the restriction in 1985 on the grounds that conditions inside South Africa had become so extreme that the original definition required re-examination. The United States government listed Nelson Mandela on its terrorism watch list. He remained on that list, formally, until 2008, 18 years after he walked out of prison, and 14 years after he became president of South Africa. Removing him required an act of Congress signed by President George W. Bush. The Cold War context mattered. The American government, during the apartheid era, considered the ANC a Soviet-aligned terrorist organization. Margaret Thatcher, the British Prime Minister, called the ANC a typical terrorist organization in 1987. Now, was she right to call them that? This is where Blackwell asks you to think carefully, because the answer is not simple, and the simple answers being shouted on either side of the question both betray the historical record. Nelson Mandela authorized armed struggle against a state that was murdering unarmed people in their townships. He authorized it after 13 years of nonviolent resistance had failed, and after the state had banned every legal avenue for political organization by Black South Africans. His armed wing carried out operations that killed civilians. Some of these operations were sabotage gone wrong. Some were deliberate. Mandela himself, in his autobiography Long Walk to Freedom, wrote that civilian casualties were inevitable in the kind of struggle they had chosen, and that this weighed on him. He spent 27 years in prison. 18 of those years were on Robben Island, where he broke limestone in a quarry that destroyed his eyes. He emerged in 1990 not vengeful. He chose, against the instincts of many around him, against the demands of younger ANC militants, to negotiate. He chose the Truth and Reconciliation Commission instead of war crimes trials. He chose the multiracial democratic constitution instead of redistribution by force. He served one term as president and stepped down voluntarily, a thing many leaders of liberation movements have been unable to do. The Peace Prize he shared with F.W. de Klerk in 1993 was, on the merits, deserved. The transition he managed prevented a civil war that every credible analyst at the time believed was inevitable. South Africa today is troubled, deeply troubled, but it exists as a single country with a single constitution, and that fact is largely his work. But the man who managed that transition, the saint the world canonized in 2013 when he died, was the same man who had 3 decades earlier signed off on the bomb that exploded outside the South African Air Force headquarters on Church Street in Pretoria in 1983 and killed 19 people, including secretaries and pedestrians who had no part in the apartheid security apparatus. He was both. He chose violence when nonviolence had been answered with bullets. He chose negotiation when violence had become its own dead end. He was a commander before he was a peacemaker. The world remembered the peacemaker. The world buried the commander. This is the point of this entire episode. The world prefers the saint. The saint is a manageable object. The saint can be put on a stamp, on a currency note, on a school wall. The saint requires nothing of you except admiration. The actual man, the man who made hard choices in real time with limited information and real costs, the man whose hands carry the weight of both the negotiation and the bomb, that man requires something harder. That man requires you to think. Nelson Mandela died on December 5, 2013, at age 95, at his home in Johannesburg. The state funeral was attended by 91 heads of state, the largest such gathering in the history of South Africa. President Barack Obama spoke. He spoke beautifully. He did not mention Umkhonto we Sizwe. He did not mention Church Street. He did not mention the 18 years on Robben Island that came after the bomb, because the bomb came first, and the prison was the consequence of the choice. The official story, told at the funeral, began with prison and ended with peace, as if the man had not had a life before he was arrested. Blackwell is not asking you to dishonor Nelson Mandela. Blackwell is asking you to honor him correctly. The simplified saint is an insult to the actual man, who knew exactly what he had done and chose to do it anyway, because the alternative was the continued, slow murder of his people. He did not need the world to forget. He needed the world to understand. The world preferred to forget. The world finds understanding harder than worship. 6 names, 6 halos, 6 archives no one wanted opened. Mahatma Gandhi, who walked into riot zones with no weapon and slept beside his teenage grandniece in the cold winter of 1946 to test his soul. Mother Teresa, who built an order that goes where no one goes and took $50 million from a thief, refused to return it, and told the dying their pain was beautiful while she flew to California for the best medicine on earth. Winston Churchill, who held Britain together in 1940 with his voice alone, and let 3 million Bengalis starve in 1943 with a wave of his hand and erased them from his memoirs. John Kennedy, who chose the blockade over the bomb during 13 days that nearly ended the world, while a doctor injected methamphetamine into his arm in the residence, and the press knew and said nothing. Albert Einstein, who taught the universe to bend, and handed his wife a typed list of conditions that included silence on demand. Nelson Mandela, who chose negotiation over revenge after 27 years in a quarry and chose the bomb before the quarry because 13 years of marching peacefully had ended at Sharpeville with 69 people shot in the back. These are not 6 villains pretending to be heroes. These are 6 heroes whose archives reveal the cost of the heroism. The cost was paid, in every case, by someone in the next room: the grandniece, the dying woman without aspirin, the Bengali farmer with the empty bowl, the wife who could not speak unless spoken to, the pedestrian on Church Street. The lesson is not that no one is good. The lesson is that good people, the ones who actually changed the world, did not change it from a position of moral perfection. They changed it from inside the same compromised flesh you are wearing right now. They lied, they cheated, they neglected, they authorized what should not have been authorized. And they also, in the same lifetimes, in the same bodies, did things that bent the moral arc of history towards something better than what they found. If you take the saint, you take the lie. If you take only the file, you take a different lie. The lie that nothing they built was real, that every speech was hypocrisy, that every march was theater. The truth is harder than either lie. The truth is that the speech was real and the hypocrisy was real, and they lived in the same person, and that person did not always know which was which. This is what the archive teaches. The archive is the only honest teacher we have. The biographers will simplify, the foundations will sanitize, the states will canonize. The archive sits in its boxes and waits. Mahatma Gandhi's diary in Sabarmati, the Lancet article on file in London, the British War Cabinet papers in Kew, the Kennedy medical records at the JFK Library in Boston, Mileva's letters at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. The TRC final report in Cape Town. Blackwell read the boxes. Blackwell is not a court. Blackwell does not deliver verdicts. Blackwell delivers documents. The verdict is yours. The question is no longer who they were. The question is what we do with the truth that the saints were also men. You can do one of 3 things with this truth. You can deny it and stay a child. You can use it to burn the statues and become a different kind of fool. Or you can do the 3rd thing, the hard thing, the thing almost no one does. You can hold both. You can admire the Salt March and grieve for Manu. You can love the Calcutta Order and refuse the 50 million. You can defend the speeches of 1940 and weep for Bengal. You can vote for a Kennedy and worry about the needle. You can teach E equals MC squared and read the rules of the household. You can revere the prisoner and remember the commander. Holding both is the work of being an adult human being inside a real history. The textbook will not teach you to do it. The funeral oration will not teach you to do it. The Wikipedia summary will not teach you to do it. The archive will, if you are willing to open it, if you are willing to read it, if you are willing to carry what you find. In the next episode of the Blackwell Files, we go further. Profession killers, the men and women whose actual job descriptions, written on official letterhead with official seals, required them to do things that no human being should ever have to do. The medical doctors who designed gas chambers, the accountants who calculated the cost-effectiveness of starvation, the architects who drew the blueprints of camps. They had degrees, they had pensions, they had families who loved them. They went to work in the morning and engineered atrocity by lunch and went home for dinner. How does a profession become a slaughterhouse? How does a degree become a weapon? How does the human being inside the uniform decide that the uniform speaks louder than the conscience? The archives are open, the files are real, the names are documented. Subscribe if you want the truth before the foundation gets to it. Subscribe if you can hold both. Subscribe if you are done with the holy card and ready for the file. This is Blackwell. The halo cracks, the archive opens. The saint, in the end, was a man. Good night.